This episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised. Hi everyone, I'm Talia.
And I'm Tanya.
And together we are Crimes and Consequences, a true crime podcast. Hi, Tanya.
Hi, Talia.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in this week. I've got a great episode I'm about ready to share with Tanya.
Yay!
Are you ready?
Yeah, I am always ready.
Now, listen, I'm just going to say a caveat. I might mispronounce some names. I might mispronounce some words, but I don't care. Okay? So let it go, people. You ready?
Yes.
This isn't high on the gruesome scale, but I think it's a really interesting story. And I really felt the need to share it with people because it is something that was in the news years ago, and there was a lot of misinformation out. That being said, let's do it. Louis Perez was a 45-year-old Marine staff sergeant at the Camp Pendleton Marine Base in Southern California. I've been there. It's awesome. When he wasn't working, he spent most of his time with his girlfriend. She was 36-year-old Dorothy Maraglino, but she went by Dee. Louis and Dee, along with Dee's best friend, she was 25-year-old Jessica Lopez, they were all active participants in the BDSM lifestyle. Give you a little bit of background on them. Dee worked at Verizon for a few years. She was able to save up enough money to buy a small home in Fallbrook, California, which is about 15 minutes from Camp Pendleton. However, in 2011, which is where this story starts taking place, Dee was unemployed and not really too interested in looking for employment. She didn't really have to because Jessica worked 2 jobs to help support her. Jessica lived in Dee's home and paid most of Dee's bills by working as a certified nursing assistant. By 2011, Louis had put in 16 years in the Marines and he was only 4 years away from retirement. Although Louis had his own separate residence, I think he lived on the base, but I'm not sure. He pretty much lived in the household too with Dee and Jessica. The 3 together functioned as one sort of household. It's kind of odd, but I'll explain as we go through the story.
Were they a throuple?
No.
No? Okay.
I've never even heard of that term.
You've never heard of throuple?
No, that's
okay.
a whole nother podcast. It was a strange household. Dee's basement had been converted into a sex dungeon. It was equipped with handcuffs, whips, leather restraints, chains, shackles. In the sex dungeon, they had painted a giant spider web, and there were bars on the ceiling to attach restraints. So they were really into this lifestyle.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. Together, Louis, Dee, and Jessica's roles in the household as the throuple, or whatever you just called it, as the throuple, if you want to say that, were of master, mistress, and slave. Now you got to follow me on this, because separate from the trio's relationship, Louis and Dee were in a dominant, submissive relationship, wherein Louis was the dominant and Dee was the submissive. But there was also another relationship with Dee and Jessica. So you have 3 different dynamics going. Jessica was Dee's slave, and Dee was her master, or mistress. Being that Louis controlled Dee, he in essence controlled Jessica. Louis would call Dee his kitten, and Dee referred to him as Master Ivan. As a masochist, Jessica, now she's the lowest on the totem pole, she's the slave, enjoyed, I shouldn't say lowest, I might have offended somebody in the BDSM world. I don't know if slave is lowest. I don't know the hierarchy. Right. But she was the masochist and the slave, and she enjoyed receiving pain and punishment from Dee. Although Jessica was a slave in Dee's household, she also was dominant in the past in other relationships, and she had an ongoing online relationship as a dominant with a woman named Bella. So that's known as a switch.
Oh, okay. Where in one relationship you're the dominant and one you're the sub.
Yes. And Dee was also a switch, meaning she was submissive to Louis, but dominant to Jessica.
There are all kinds of dynamics going on here.
See what you're learning by listening?
I know. Jeez, it's always an education.
Being unemployed with a lot of time on her hands, Dee wrote various manuals that established written procedures for the household. One was titled The House Manual. It was 16 pages long, and it described in detail what was required and forbidden by the household members. It was so detailed, it even included the direction the toilet paper roll needed to be.
I kind of understand that one, though.
Another manual she wrote was titled, quote, The Perfect Slave Checklist. I tried so hard to find that, but I couldn't.
Oh, I wish.
I know. She also wrote a slave contract in which she signed as a slave to Louis and Jessica signed as a slave to her. Dee controlled everything Jessica did inside and outside the home. This wasn't just like a temporary role-playing Friday night, a little bit of wine in the basement dungeon. This was all the time. Jessica even wore a red dog collar that stated, quote, the property of Miss D, end quote.
Okay.
Louis was a sadist. He enjoyed inflicting pain on others. This was a common theme in almost all of his romantic relationships. In one particular relationship, he choked his girlfriend, we'll call her Jennifer, almost every time they had sex. Some of the BDSM between Jennifer and Louis was consensual, but some of it wasn't. And this is prior to Dee, okay? Jennifer and Louis agreed on a safe word for her to use to signify that she wanted Louis to stop the BDSM play because it was getting too much, but he would often ignore her when she used it.
Oh, that's creepy.
That's breaking the BDSM rules.
Yeah, everything is consensual, or it should be.
On a few occasions during sex, while Jennifer was restrained, he would drag a heavy chain and a knife across her body, even though she kept saying the safe word over and over again. Jennifer was also really disturbed when Louis suggested to her that she let him arrange to have her abducted and raped by strangers. She refused to participate in any kidnapping rape fantasy that he had, and they broke up.
That's what did it.
That's the deal breaker. It's a deal breaker for me, too.
Yeah, I don't want to have anything to do with it.
No,
either.
thank you. In another of Louis's relationships, again, prior to being with Dee, he choked his girlfriend Amy about 25 to 30% of the time during sex, either with his hands or with a belt. He also pressured Amy to allow him and a group of men that she didn't know to gang rape her in the back of a van while they drove around. According to Louis, he and others had acted out this kidnapping rape fantasy many times. Amy, again, like Jennifer, refused to participate in that, and the relationship soured. But Louis wasn't the only one of the household members with these types of fantasies. Both Jessica and Dee also fantasized about abduction, torture, and murder.
Really?
Yeah, murder. In fact, Jessica's diary contained ciphered writing, and I saw the writings, and it's in some sort of code that she made up, which described in graphic detail how she would abduct, torture, and kill someone she hated. When she was done, she would douse the body and all the evidence with bleach and dispose of the corpse. Dee also wrote about her dark fantasies of torture and murder. She was a very prolific writer, as I've described. In one story, she wrote about abducting 3 generations of women, a grandma, a mother, and a daughter. Each one of the women would have their own prescribed method of death and would be subjected to sexual torture and non-sexual torture. In her story, after Dee was done abusing the women, she would force them to commit suicide.
Damn, that got dark.
In another written fantasy of Dee's, she describes slicing the throat of a woman while the woman was having sex with Louis.
Wow.
Damn,
These are dark fantasies.
Sick shit. BDSM is one thing, but
murdering someone, I mean that
getting
crosses
aroused?
a line. Yeah.
That's so scary. Another one of Dee's writings consisted of a list of hunting grounds for vulnerable victims. One of the places on the list that Dee thought would be great to find a victim was AA meetings.
Oh, that's just sad.
Isn't
That's
it
just really sad.
Bizarre? It's just so bizarre to me. She also detailed various ways that she would dispose of a body to avoid detection from police. Now, Dee was not shy about sharing her abduction and murder fantasies. In fact, she would often talk about them with another one of her slaves because she had another slave. Her name was Dora, but Dora didn't live in the household. They all have their own little side projects, I've noticed. At one point, Dee asked Dora how she would react if Dee kidnapped a woman and brought her to Dora's house. This bothered Dora because she felt that Dee's fantasies didn't take consent into account. But she assumed that Dee was just kind of rambling some bullshit and it was nothing more than a fantasy. But she was wrong.
Oh.
One night, Louis and Dee decided it was time to act out an abduction fantasy on a woman named Nicole. Although Nicole was known to Dee and Louis through the BDSM world, she didn't give her consent when they kidnapped her from a parking lot. They forced her into their car, blindfolded her, took her back to Dee's house. There, they undressed her and restrained her in the dungeon. Surprisingly, though, when they were finished, Nicole voluntarily joined them in the household as Dee's slave and brought with her her younger daughter.
So she moved in?
Yes. Yes, she did. This is all from the court records, too, so she testified, but we'll get to that. Not long after Nicole moved in, Dee became very upset with her. Nicole had been instructed, as Dee's slave, not to communicate directly with Louis. All the communication had to be through Dee. However, Nicole would oftentimes speak directly to Louis. I mean, it would be hard in a house. Can you pass the butter knife? Like, hey, Dee, can you ask him to pass me the butter knife? That would get tricky. Although Louis and Dee had this open relationship, Dee was very paranoid about losing Louis to another woman. She was really insecure. With Nicole in the house, Dee's paranoia and insecurity was heightened. Eventually, Dee and Nicole's relationship deteriorated, and Dee started making violent threats directed at Nicole's daughter. After living in Dee's household for 3 months, Nicole and her daughter, they got out. Not long after that, Louis began seeing a woman named Marina. Again, Dee became extremely insecure. She started sharing with other people her desire to kill Marina in a torturous death. And that's quote. She posted in chat room details of how she would torture and kill not only Marina, but also Marina's young daughter, too. Louis and Dee constantly fought over him seeing Marina, and eventually Louis and Dee broke up. However, this breakup didn't last very long, and they soon rekindled their beautiful relationship. In late 2011, Dee became pregnant with Louis's baby.
Oh, that's great.
And they claim that they became more conventional, and Dee even told some people she wasn't doing BDSM while she was pregnant, but that's not true. On April 12th of 2012, Dee sent her friend Deborah a text message regarding her desire to kidnap, torture, and force someone to suck the milk from her lactating breast. She called it the torture lactating session.
She's going to do this to someone unwilling.
Yes. Dee, Louis, and Jessica still fantasized about kidnapping, torturing, and murdering someone. And the next day, after she expressed her lactating fantasy, she wrote a very foreboding decree. It said, quote, I, Dee, do hereby give to Louis all my grudges and revenge from my birth till now. I release my anger and entrust justice into Louis's hands. I accept Louis will decide, design, and dispense the measures of retribution he deems appropriate to my enemies, tormentors, and violators. End quote.
Wow. She just gave him everything.
Basically, my interpretation is I hate some fucking people and you need to deal with it for me, honey. That's my interpretation. You need to kick somebody's ass.
I'm going to allow you to kick people's asses
on my behalf.
Yes,
I entrust you to do this. On that same day, Louis texted a friend of his, telling his friend about his plans to engage in BDSM play with a woman he didn't like. This was a big red flag to his friend, who told Louis it's a really bad idea and you absolutely cannot engage in BDSM with someone you don't like because you run the risk of going too far. But Louis claimed it would give him the control he needed to temper his feelings so he didn't hurt someone else that he wanted to hurt but shouldn't, aka D. That's my guess on it.
Oh, that sounds accurate.
Together, Louis, Jessica, and Dee decided that the time had come to act out their abduction, torture, murder fantasy. And they already had a victim in mind. Her name was Brittany Killgore. 22-year-old Brittany Rest Kilgore was originally from Pennsylvania. At the age of 20, she married Lance Corporal Cory Killgore. He got stationed in Camp Pendleton, so Brittany moved there to be with him. Eventually, Cory was sent to Afghanistan, and their relationship deteriorated. I mean, they're young, you know. On April 11th, and this is just a few days earlier than what I've been talking about, Brittany filed for divorce. She missed her family in Pennsylvania, and she decided she wanted to just move back home and be with them. In California, she was very close with a woman named Liz Hernandez, and Liz was friends with Dee. Liz had met Dee in 2011 when she responded to an ad from Dee for a used fertility monitor on a website for military families. At that time, both Liz and Dee were trying to get pregnant, so when Liz went over to her house to buy the monitor, they struck up a conversation that led to an eventual friendship. Liz visited Dee's home, and Brittany would often come along with her because Brittany and Liz lived next to each other, and they were best friends. Although Brittany and Liz knew that Jessica, Dee, and Louis were involved in the BDSM lifestyle, they themselves were not, and they made that point very clear to them. At first, Dee was initially friendly with Brittany, but eventually her insecurity and her jealousy and paranoia came out. She believed Brittany was flirting with Louis, and Brittany, by the way, is beautiful. I showed you a picture of her. She's gorgeous. So I can see why Dee would be insecure because she's just a beautiful woman. In addition, Dee wanted to recruit Liz into the BDSM lifestyle because she believed Liz was impressionable and easy to control. But she felt like Brittany's friendship with Liz interfered with that. Like, Brittany wouldn't let Liz be manipulated like that. Dee began referring to Brittany as, quote, the disease and the herpes.
Oh, no.
Behind her back. She even once joked with Liz, one time when Liz and Brittany were having a small tiff, that she could get rid of Brittany for her if she wanted her to.
Red flag.
Just a joke. I'm just kidding. I'm not really going to off your friend. Wink, wink.
Yeah.
Unless you want me to.
Unless you really want me to.
But Jessica liked Brittany. Even though she's a slave, she didn't have a real beef with Brittany. But she still called her the disease and the herpes behind her back. And she would make jokes about making Brittany disappear, probably to appease Dee. On the afternoon of Friday, April 13th, in 2012, Liz went to Dee's home to return a camera charger that she had borrowed. She hung out with Dee and Louis for a little while and told them about Brittany filing for divorce and deciding to move back to Pennsylvania. During that conversation, Liz also told Louis and Dee about what a great time she had at the Hornblower dinner cruise that was in San Diego a few days earlier. It's one of those boats that you have a nice fancy meal on and it goes in the water.
Sounds lovely.
It sounds lovely. And it was lovely. That's what she was telling him, how amazing it was. Liz also told him that Brittany really wanted to go on the Hornblower dinner cruise before she went back to Pennsylvania. It was one of the last things she had on her bucket list, kind of. This gave Louis and Dee an idea. A few hours later, at 4:30 in the afternoon, that same day, Louis drove over to Brittany's apartment and knocked on her door. Brittany was inside with her friend, Channy, and Channy will come up throughout the story. Channy's a female. She also lives next to Brittany. Channy was helping her pack up her things for the move. When Brittany answered the door, she was really surprised to see Louis standing there, And she was confused because she had no idea how he knew where she lived. They just weren't close. They were more of just acquaintances. And they didn't really even interact that much together. She asked him, "How did you get my address?" And he told her, "I just asked around." While standing at the door, Louis asked Brittany if she'd like to come with him on the Hornblower dinner cruise that night. He said he had 2 tickets, and Dee was afraid, because she's pregnant, that she'd get seasick if she was on a boat. Brittany told him she was too tired, but Louis continued to pressure her into coming, but she still said no. Louis gave Brittany his phone number and told her to call him if she changed her mind, and he left. He immediately texted Dee and said, quote, "That man failed," end quote, to which Dee replied, quote, "Tomorrow's another day," end quote. A few minutes after Louis left Brittany's apartment, Brittany texted him asking if he knew anyone who could help her move her stuff. He responded by saying, "Party with me tonight and you'll have 5 guys there in the morning to help." Brittany said, "I would love to have 5 guys help me move, but I feel really weird about partying because you have a girlfriend and I don't want to upset her." This whole thing started feeling really weird to Brittany. She told her friend Channy about Louis's odd request to party and how uncomfortable it made her feel because she could tell that Dee didn't really like her. Then she got another text from Louis reassuring her that Dee was totally fine with them partying. He told Brittany she could text Dee and confirm that it was cool with her. Brittany wrote back, said, "I don't have Dee's number, and I don't think that Dee really likes me." And he reassured her that that was not the case, and he gave her Dee's number. Now, you can see, as I start to tell you more about this, he really puts the pressure on Brittany. A few minutes later, he texts Brittany back, and he says, "Have you contacted Dee yet?" She told Louis, "I haven't, but I will in a few minutes." Meanwhile, Dee is searching the internet for information regarding the Hornblower dinner cruise. And I think she's just doing that in case Brittany asks questions about it. A minute later, Louis texts Brittany to say, "Listen, I'm dressing up to go to dinner at the Hornblower. Basically, it's now or never." So Brittany decides she's going to call Dee and make sure that Dee isn't going to be upset. It's 5:55 p.m. About 10 minutes later, Dee calls back, and she actually starts laughing with Brittany, telling her, no, don't even worry about it. I'm pregnant. I'm afraid I'll get seasick. Just go." Against her intuition, Brittany decided to go with Louis. She told Channy that she had no romantic interest in him whatsoever, but this would be her last chance to go on that dinner cruise before she went to Pennsylvania.
This dinner cruise must be fucking awesome, right?
That's what it made it sound like in the court records. Really. I'm going to have to check out the Hornblower.
Honestly, next time I'm in San Diego.
A little after 6, Brittany texted Louis and said, "Okay, I'll go there with you." And she asked him what time he'd be there to get her and when she could expect his friends to be at her house to help her move. He responded by saying, "Be ready by 7:30, and my friends will be there whatever time you need them to be there in the morning." Unbeknownst to Brittany, the Hornblower cruise was set to leave the dock in San Diego at 7. Louis never purchased any tickets for the cruise. And again, I have to reiterate, all of this felt very wrong to Brittany. She told Channy she felt unsure about the whole thing, and she even gave Channy Dee and Louis's phone number just in case something happened. She texted her friend Liz, telling her how odd it was that Louis asked her out, and Liz was really puzzled by it too, since she's better friends with Louis, and it just seemed really odd. The Hornblower dinner cruise, as I said, it was a formal dining experience. Brittany didn't have anything to wear, so she borrowed a purple dress from Channy. She did her hair and makeup, and she waited for Louis to arrive. At 7:30, Louis sent Brittany a text saying, "I'm running late. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Can you meet me at the curb? I just got stopped at your front gate." Because she was in a gated apartment complex. Brittany responded, "At the curb? It's raining, I'd appreciate it if you drove into the complex." That's a quote. But Louis, he didn't really want to enter a complex because he knew there were cameras. He'd been there earlier. And he argued to her, "It's not raining. I don't want to miss our boat." I just love how someone's going to try to argue if it's raining or not. Eventually, he just called her on the phone, and after she protested and refused to walk to the curb, he had no other choice but to pick her up in front of the apartment. At 7:37, and I'm going to say the times because a lot happens very quickly. At 7:37, Louis texted, "I'm here." Brittany walked outside and got into the passenger side of Louis's car. While in the car, she texted her friend. Her name is Jessica Perry, but I'm going to call her Perry because we have the other Jessica, the slave, telling Perry that she was going to go out with Louis on a dinner cruise, but might stop by to visit her afterwards because they lived in the same apartment complex. Louis then told Brittany that before they went to Hornblower's, he had to make a quick stop to Dee's home to pick up the tickets. Dee lived about 10 minutes from Brittany's apartment. At 7:50, 10 minutes after leaving the apartment complex, Brittany sent Channy a text message with only one word: help.
Oh, no.
We're going to take a quick break, and I'll be right back. Hey everyone, if you go to our website, tntcrimes.com, you can find full unreleased episodes available for individual purchase. You can also join our membership where you get unlimited access to all of our unreleased episodes, early releases, mini episodes, and so many other awesome things. So go to tntcrimes.com. And thanks again for all your support. Shortly thereafter, neighbors saw Louis's car swerve into Dee's driveway. 7 minutes after Brittany's help text, Louis sent Dee a text with one word: kitten, with a question mark. Dee and Jessica weren't home. These two idiots went to the grocery store and they were supposed to be home, but when they went to check out, Jessica realized that she forgot her wallet, so she had to go back to Dee's house. She left the store while Dee waited at the checkout aisle, went back, got her wallet, and then came back to the store, then paid. Why they've got a kidnapping victim in their driveway.
The kidnapping's in progress.
Around 8 p.m., Channy saw the text from Brittany and asked if Brittany was all right. After getting no response, Channy called her phone twice and then texted her again saying, "I'm freaking out and I need to know you're all right." That's quote. Roughly 5 minutes later, she received a text message from Brittany's phone stating, quote, "Yes, I love this party," end quote. Channy was suspicious because Channy was good friends with Brittany, and Brittany always said, "yeah," not "yes." And that just stood out in Channy's head. You know, you get to know somebody, you know. At this point, Channy's very confused and demanded Brittany call her so she could hear her voice. But instead of getting a call, she received another suspicious text message at 8:07 from Brittany's phone that said, quote, "in a few hot guys," end quote. Now, Channy's getting really freaked out, and she's, again, insistent that Brittany call her immediately. And she's texting her saying, "You had better call me." A minute or two later, Channy got a brief phone call from Brittany's phone, but Channy couldn't hear anything because there was just music blaring, and then the phone went dead. Immediately after that call, Channy got another call from Brittany's phone. Again, it only lasted a few seconds, and again, the music was too loud to hear anything. Frustrated, Channy texted Brittany saying, "I couldn't hear anything." And she got a response back saying, quote, "It's okay, music is too loud," end quote. What Channy didn't know is that Louis was texting her from his car and blasting the music in the radio. He was sitting in his driveway waiting for Dee and Jessica to get home. He's getting real antsy because at 8:11, he texts Dee and says, "You need to come home. Hurry up." Within minutes, they were home. While all this is happening, Channy starts calling Brittany's other friends, calls Liz and Perry, expressing how wrong this all feels to her. Now Liz starts calling Brittany over and over again, and she decides enough of this, and she calls Dee and says, "You know, what the hell is going on? Where is Brittany?" And Dee says to her, "I haven't spoken to Brittany all day." At that point, Liz didn't know that was a lie. She was just confused. So Brittany's friends are blowing up her phone, calls and texts. At 8:40, Perry decides to cut to the chase and just calls Louis. He answered the phone and told her that Brittany and he had decided not to go to the Hornblowers. Instead, they went downtown to a club called the Whiskey Girl Night. According to Louis, he dropped Brittany off in front of the club so he could park his Ford Explorer. As he drove off, he saw her talking to a group of guys in the front. He said it took him about 15 minutes to park his car, and then by the time he walked back to the club, Brittany was gone. Something struck Perry as really odd about this conversation, because during this conversation, Louis kept telling her that Brittany's face looked okay to him. Brittany's face looks okay to me, over and over.
What does that mean? That's fucking weird.
I have a feeling he was looking right at Brittany.
Oh.
While he was talking to her friend. That's my take. He said over and over again, Brittany's face looks okay to me.
Very weird.
At this time, Jessica, Dee, and Louis were all together inside Dee's house. And Dee reminded him that cell phones were traceable, and they had Brittany's cell phone. At 9:20, almost 2 hours after Brittany first got into Louis's car, Louis took Brittany's cell phone and he started driving towards downtown San Diego. While he was driving, he texted Brittany saying, "Where are you? Your friends are calling me worried, and now I'm worried too."
Mm-hmm.
He sent another text to Dee asking how her night was, and Dee responded that she was just having a quiet night at home. By 10:10 that evening, Brittany's friends were near desperate. Channy texted Brittany and said, "Should I just call the cops?" But she got a response that said, "I'm okay." So she didn't call the cops. Then at 11, Louis frantically called Perry. In a panic, he told her he'd been driving around looking for Brittany in downtown San Diego and he couldn't find her anywhere. So eventually he said, "I'm just going to have to go back to Dee's house." I don't know what happened in the interim, but the next morning, Liz called Dee and confronted her about how she had lied about not speaking to Brittany the day before. Liz had found out from Channy that they had talked. Dee started stuttering and handed the phone to Louis. Louis tried to calm Liz down by explaining how he dropped Brittany off at the Whiskey Girl Night and then she just disappeared. But during his conversation with Liz, he changed his story 3 times. So the facts weren't adding up. Channy and Liz, around 2 o'clock on the afternoon of Saturday, the 14th, they decided it was time to call the police and report Brittany missing. A police officer showed up at Brittany's apartment to take the missing persons report. While Liz was talking to the officer, Louis called her phone. He offered to pick Liz up and drive around with her to find Brittany.
Oh, girl, don't do it.
Don't do it. But Liz let him know, I'm talking to the police right now, and I don't need your assistance. A few minutes later, Louis got a call from the police, and they said, "Would you mind coming down to Brittany's apartment to talk to us for a little bit since you're the last person to see her?" Louis agreed. He pulled into the apartment complex, and he started talking to an officer. He told the officer that Brittany was flirty, flighty, and she was drinking a lot of alcohol that night. Liz and Channy heard this, and they got really upset because that wasn't Brittany. That was just bullshit. Then Louis told the police officer the same story he told her friends. The last time he saw her, she was drunk, talking to a group of guys. But he made a little mistake. He told the police that he got a text later on from Brittany saying that she was okay. And the officer said, "Oh, okay, can I see your phone?" And he's like, "Sure." Louis hands the officer the phone, and the deputy searches through Louis's text messages, and there's no message from Brittany saying she was okay. This officer wasn't a dummy. This was a red flag for him. In addition, he looked at Louis's Ford Explorer, and it was caked with fresh mud, and so was his shoes. So he asked him, "What's going on with all this mud?" Louis tried to explain to the officer that he'd been out collecting wood near Camp Pendleton, and that's where the mud came from. And like an idiot, he agreed to voluntarily go down to the police department, and he agreed to let the police search his car. Don't do it! You need a lawyer! Shut up!
I love stupid criminals.
I know! And this is how stupid he is. You're going to love this. Because the police officer at Brittany's apartment complex in the parking lot decided to just do a cursory search of the car. And it turned up there was a stolen AR-15, an assault rifle.
Shut up!
In it.
Wow.
And he got arrested.
He knew it was there.
I know. Why are you going to be like, okay, go ahead, search? Later, police did a more thorough search of Louis's car. When they did, they found a plastic garbage bag with blood on it, disposable gloves with blood on them, and a piece of plastic, like tarp-like thing, covered with blood. They also found a stun baton. Do you know what a stun baton is?
I think. Like a stun gun, but it's a stick?
Yes. And then you poke somebody and it like shoots.
Shocks you?
Yeah. Instead of like a taser. Yes. He just happened to have one in his car.
He's got everything in his car, it seems like, right?
Eventually, the blood on the items was matched to Brittany. The stun gun contained Louis's DNA on the handle, and it has a strap around it to put on your wrist. That had Louis's DNA, but the 5 prongs of it had Brittany's DNA on it. Strangely, later the same day that Louis got arrested, a homeless man found Brittany's phone in the doorway of a Comfort Inn in the gas lamp quarters of San Diego. The transient had tried to sell the phone to a stranger, and the stranger took the phone and he went through it. Back then, I don't think we had the codes as much as we do now. And he saw in the contact's mom, and he pressed it, and Brittany's mom answered, and she was aware that Brittany was missing, so the stranger turned in the phone to the police. With Louis in jail, deputies obtained a search warrant to search Dee's home. There, they recovered a roll of plastic and a reciprocating saw blade.
Oh, that's not good.
They also took images, videos, writings, a ball gag, a leather collar, zip ties, multiple ropes and cords, swords, a machete, black spiked gloves, and a black knife labeled, quote, the Black Defender, unquote. I don't know.
Jesus Christ.
I don't know. Don't ask anything. Don't say anything. I don't have any answers or words. In one of the videos they confiscated, Louis was beating a woman, and it wasn't Brittany, with various instruments as she begged him to stop. He continued to beat her even after she became unconscious. And although he was known in the BDSM community as a safe player, they call it, it clearly wasn't true. At Dee's house, officers recovered a form called Release of Liability.
What?
I know it's not a legal form. Wait till I tell you about it. I promise you it's not legal. In this form, Dee stated she voluntarily engaged with Louis in BDSM activities, including whipping, beating, asphyxia, and that she relieved Louis of, quote, injuries or loss of life that may result from such activities.
So it's okay if you kill me?
Yeah.
I'm releasing your liability.
Yes. Not going to hold up in court.
No, that's not.
There was so much for the police, as you can imagine, to go through at this house that they had to leave for the night and come back the next day. It was clear to authorities that when they returned to that home, it had been thoroughly cleaned. And I'm not sure why they didn't have somebody watching it.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
But according to the court records, it had been thoroughly cleaned. Sheriff deputies ultimately found no evidence of blood or semen at Dee's home. And I mean, I'm a little surprised by that after what I've told you about that house. You'd think it would be dripping with semen.
It's everywhere, I'm sure.
I mean, that's how I envisioned that basement. The Sheriff's Department authorized a search of Dee's Nissan Titan truck, which bore the license plate. Are you ready for this?
Oh, I can't wait.
Ivan's kitten.
Oh, jeez.
But in order to execute the warrant for the truck, they needed to find it. And they needed to find Dee. And she wasn't around, and neither was Jessica. The next day, officers were able to find the Nissan Titan truck in the parking lot of the Ramada Inn near the San Diego airport. Dee had registered as a guest in room 105. According to the staff there, she and another woman had checked into the motel late Monday night. Now, Brittany had disappeared on Friday. With this information, officers surrounded the hotel. They knocked on room 105, but no one came to the door. But through the door, they could hear the faint sounds of a woman in distress. It sounded like she was mumbling she was too weak to get up. So they forced the door open, and when they did, they found a woman naked from the waist up, and below the waist, she had a red dress pulled down and combat boots on. The woman had wounds to her neck and deep cuts on her forearms. The bed sheets and the hotel room floors were stained with blood. In the bathroom was an empty bottle of Chambord next to a bloody razor with a blade. 2 large knives were found on the bathtub ledge. At first, the police wondered if this woman could be Brittany, but realized quickly this woman didn't match Brittany's description. The woman mumbled to authorities that her name was Rosalind. As they helped her up, she passed out on the carpet, so an ambulance had to be called. At the hospital, the woman's identity was discovered. It was Jessica Lopez, and she was placed under arrest. She had attempted to commit suicide, but didn't succeed. After obtaining a search warrant to analyze the hotel room, because they actually had to get a search warrant to search it, they saw on top of the bed was a dog collar that Jessica wore that said the property of Miss D. Now, this is really strange, okay? So in hotel rooms, you know how they have sometimes a vanity area? They've got this countertop and a mirror behind it, and you can...
Yes.
So at the vanity area of the hotel room, above it is a pole that you can put hangers on and hang clothes.
Okay.
There was a hanger on the pole, and pinned to the hanger on the pole above the vanity was a note. And it said in someone's handwriting, "Pigs read this!" exclamation.
So it's a note for the police?
Yes. Or
nice.
some pigs.
Or some pigs.
It's not clear in the court records. Below the note on the vanity counter was a handwritten 7-page letter. Next to that lay 3 sealed envelopes addressed to Master Ivan, the parents of Jessica Lopez, and a local news station. Each envelope contained a separate copy of the letter. Jessica had asked the front desk if they would make copies for her, and they did. The letter ended up being a confession in which Jessica described what she allegedly alone did to Brittany. I don't have the exact letter, but I searched everywhere to get as many excerpts from it as I could and try to piece it together, and I'm going to tell you what it said. She said that the killing was more physically difficult than what you see on TV. Quote, "I thought I was defending the family and it would be simple like Dexter." End quote. She detailed handcuffing Brittany, slamming Brittany into the basement stairs, duct taping her ankles, handcuffing her, and placing duct tape over her mouth. And here's another direct quote from the letter. "You'll also find a taser mark and several ligature marks around her scrawny little neck as the bitch just wouldn't die. You'll find plenty of mutilation marks and bruises of where I knocked her down and I held her still. And I wrapped the rope around her neck after burying her face in the pillow and started strangling her. She barely moved, but she just wouldn't die, the miserable whore. I had to keep releasing and readjusting, even wrapping the rope around my foot for leverage. It was as if my idol Dexter had spoken directly to me. I made a few attempts to chop her up, like Dexter, with Master's tools, but I was afraid it was too loud and it sucked at cutting flesh. Master, I know you said to respect the tools, but I'm sorry, I had to throw them out. I could tell my pills were about to kick in, and I knew I had to dump the body fast. I hid the body of the whore in almost plain sight. She didn't deserve a burial. I dropped that useless waste of space off some little hill off the road by Lake Skinner. I don't know where exactly. I tossed bleach all over the miserable cunt and just rolled her down the hill. I'm sorry, mistress. I know you would have stopped me if you had been there. But," and then she says something like, "The pigs call themselves cops, but they're so narrow-minded as usual. They're trying to pin this on the one guy that would have helped Brittany, Louis." And that's the end of that excerpt.
Oh, that's a gross letter.
Isn't that horrible?
That's horrible.
No remorse whatsoever. The letter further stated that the police could find a knife and handcuffs in a beach restroom in Ocean City where Jessica had tossed them out. It ended by calling Brittany a homewrecker and expressing how much Jessica loved being a slave and a pet to Dee. The police aren't buying that Jessica acted alone.
Neither do I.
Dee had been staying at the hotel with Jessica, but she managed to elude the police by driving to Virginia to see her family. I don't know what vehicle she took to do that, but I know her Nissan was in the hotel parking lot. Of course, it didn't take long for police to find her in Virginia, and they eventually arrested her. When they searched her truck, they recovered a rope, a knife, a receipt for cleaning products, water, paper towels, and rubber gloves, all purchased on April 14th, which is a few hours after Brittany disappeared. None of that, though, could be physically connected to Brittany's murder. So they have all of this information, They know Brittany's dead, but now they need to find Brittany. Based on the details in Jessica's letters, deputies focused their search on the Lake Skinner area in Riverside County, California. It's about 25 miles from Dee's house. This just goes with your stupid criminal thing. As the lead sheriff's detective Brian Patterson was driving towards Lake Skinner to start the search, he got a call from Dee. Dee thought she was really clever and attempted to give him an alibi for the night of the murder. She told him that she and Jessica had ordered a movie on cable called Adventures of Rin Tin. I read this, I'm like, of all the things, I'm like, what the fuck?
Yeah, what?
What? These people are watching Adventures of Rin Tin.
Sure they are.
She said after watching the movie, they just fell asleep.
Even though Jessica wrote a whole letter about doing it.
But Detective Patterson was one step ahead of Dee. He already knew that she rented the Adventure of Rin Tin movie, because she did rent that, but she rented it the day after the murder.
The Adventures of Rin Tin. Stop it.
I can't. When he said, hey, you're off by a day, she hung up the phone.
Oops. So shit.
My bad. After only a few hours of searching, deputies found Brittany's nude body laying in some brush at the bottom of an embankment about a mile from Lake Skinner. As police combed the scene, Brittany was removed and taken to the medical examiner for an autopsy. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was ligature strangulation, just as Jessica had said. The hemorrhaging in Brittany's eyes were consistent with pressure being intermittently applied and released over a long period of time. So it was a slow strangulation. The cartilage in Brittany's neck had been fractured, indicating that someone had applied more than 33 pounds of pressure on her neck. I don't know a lot about that, but if they're putting it in there, it means it's a lot. There were bruises on her legs and 2 cuts forming a T on her left wrist. And she also had 5 small pinprick marks on the left side of her face from the stun baton. In addition, there were deep postmortem cuts to Brittany's left knee by a power saw, and her wrist showed bruises from being handcuffed. Brittany's body had been left out in the elements for 4 days, and normally, this is kind of sick, but normally there would be a lot of insect activity on a dead body in California. However, Brittany's body had very little insect activity because the medical examiner determined that she'd been doused with bleach. Her back had lacerations and scrapes on it, most likely from when she was rolled down the embankment. But really oddly, there were no visible signs that she'd been raped.
Really?
No, I think they got off on the torture of it all and the murder.
That's what it would seem like, right?
But not every time someone's raped are there signs, so...
Who knows?
They don't know. Jessica, Dee, and Louis all got arrested, and they were all in jail, awaiting trial for the first-degree murder of Brittany Killgore. In jail, Dee gave birth to a bouncing baby boy.
Poor kid.
Now, this is one of the reasons I really wanted to do this story, is because when I had heard about this on the news, I thought Brittany was maybe cheating on her husband, and a lot of people said she was into BDSM, and none of that was true. She didn't even want to be with these people. Brittany's husband, Corey, released a statement that I felt was important enough to share. He said, quote, "My wife, Brittany, was beautiful beyond words, and her murder has left me devastated. My duty to her memory now is to ensure her good reputation remains intact and help law enforcement and prosecutors secure justice for the person or persons who took her away from me. Brittany's death cannot be in vain. At this point, I don't know how to use this tragedy for good, but others have found their way, and I hope to do the same. Brittany meant too much to do any less. Please honor my wife's name and don't succumb to the salacious gossip and rumor. Brittany was a beautiful, good person who did not deserve this."
Oh, that's really heartbreaking.
Eventually, Louis confessed to his part in the murder. He said, "Everybody had a role to play that night, including myself, but I didn't kill anybody."
Uh-huh.
Might as well have, even if he didn't pull the trigger, right?
Honestly.
According to Louis, Dee and him came up with a plan on Friday the 13th while Jessica was at work. Louis then picked Brittany up. In the car, at some point, Brittany realized she was in deep trouble, and that's when she texted Channy help. Louis used the stun baton on her to subdue her, and he handcuffed her while he waited in the driveway for Jessica and Dee to get home. Once they arrived home, Brittany was taken inside, brought to the dungeon, and tortured for a few hours before eventually being murdered. It's unsure if Brittany was murdered before Louis left to dispose of her phone or after, but what we do know is when Louis got back from dumping the phone and pretending to be looking for her to appease her friends, he and Jessica wrapped Brittany's corpse in a tarp, and they put it in a trailer, and they hitched the trailer to Louis's Ford Explorer. Louis drove the trailer to Lake Skinner, and Jessica tailed really close behind his car because he didn't have a plate on the trailer. The two stopped and threw Brittany's body down the embankment near Lake Skinner. All three were tried together. After deliberating for more than 18 hours over the course of 3 days, a jury announced the verdict on October 24th in 2014. All of them got convicted for kidnapping, torture, and sexual battery. And I thought that part was interesting because the medical examiner said there was no bruises or anything to her genitalia. But in reading the court records, the court said it's so obvious that BDSM was such a huge part of their plan that sexual battery had to have been a result. So they all got sentenced to life. At Louis's sentencing, he addressed the court. And you're gonna just know he's an asshole. He thanked his family and friends who stood by him, quote, during this horrible and trying time. Those that know me know that I have never raised my hand in anger at another soul. I have to apologize to all the families that have had to suffer through these trials and tribulations. This is tragedy in the worst case, end quote.
Oh, fuck off.
Brittany's mother, Michelle Rest, she spoke up. And she said, quote, I hope that each day in prison is miserable until you draw your last breath. May God grant you forgiveness because I cannot, end quote.
Yeah, I think I'd say something like that. But I'd start it off with, you can all fucking die.
I would start it off with two words, F and U, involved in those.
Right? That's sad.
That is the story of Brittany Killgore's BDSM nightmare.
That poor girl.
I know. There are very scary people out there in the world. And everybody needs to be very cautious. Trust your intuition.
That's the lesson to learn here.
So I want to thank everybody for taking their time out today to listen to this story. If you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe/follow button. If you want some more information, you can go to our website, tntcrimes.com. You can also go to our social media. Instagram, it's TNT Crimes Podcast. And Facebook, it's TNT Crimes Podcast. And if you guys want, you can help support us by becoming a member because we don't get paid to do this, but
I'd like to.
So you can go to tntcrimes.com and look at all the episodes we have for our members. If you become a member, you can join us live. We have a lot of fun doing live episodes, and you get bonus episodes every week, mini episodes, and a lot. So go to patreon.com/TNTcrimes or go to our website. And for fun, if you're really bored, you can go to our TikTok account. It's at True Crime Podcast. That's the handle. I just started that. I want everybody here to instant message us or Facebook us demanding Tanya do a TikTok video. Please.
No.
Please. If enough of you ask, she will do it. Is that it?
That's it.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe. Don't kill each other.
Bye.
Bye.